Hello, and thank you for attending today's Housing and Security Learning Cohort webinar. My name is Monique Van Blaricum, and I'm the Associate Executive Director here at the Root Cause Coalition. We are thrilled to have you all participate and to have with us two wonderful presenters whom I will introduce in a bit. Following today's presentation, we will continue the conversation via Forumbee, the online platform the Root Cause Coalition has been using to share thoughts, perspectives, and resources with one another in the learning cohorts. If you need assistance logging on to the Forumbee platform, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Just quickly, in terms of housekeeping, today's speakers will present for about 45 minutes, and then we will leave some time for question and answer. If you have a question, please enter it into the question box within the GoToWebinar platform. It's usually located at the right side of your screen, and I will field questions at the end of the webinar when we have the 15 minutes at the end. You do not need to wait until the end of the presentation to ask your question, though. Go ahead and enter it into the question pane as it comes up to you throughout the presentation. Also, following today's presentation, you'll receive an email from the Root Cause Coalition with a link to a short survey to provide your feedback. So thank you in advance for taking a few minutes to complete it. And as always, we encourage you to be an active participant on the Forumbee website. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted on Forumbee within the week. So now I'd like to introduce our two speakers. Adrienne Bond Harris is an advisor at the Community Investment is an advisor of community investment for the Center for Community Investment. Prior to CCI, Adrienne was the Chief of Staff with the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, focused primarily on the preservation of healthy housing using innovative multi-sector financing and a direct service model used in Baltimore, Maryland, and cities across the country. Adrienne worked in affordable housing and community development programs for over 15 years in Metro, Nashville, Davidson County, Tennessee, including directing the Mayor's Office of Housing, focused on county-wide housing policy and initiatives. And we also have Amy Regal, who is the Director of Housing at CareSource, where she plays an integral role in designing a new division of CareSource Life Services, which addresses the social determinants of health. In this position, she is focused on creating innovative and sustainable approaches to integrating health and housing. She is focused on building collaborative partnerships to address affordable housing through development, financing, and policy with an emphasis on improving health outcomes. Previously, she was the Director of Job Connect Ohio at CareSource, leading the effort to assist Medicaid members in removing barriers to high-quality employment opportunities. And with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Amy.
Thanks, Monique. You can go ahead and move on to the next slide. Thank you all for joining today to talk about how we can take the housing work and move from theory to practice. And to start that off, I'm going to tell you a little bit about CareSource and then the work that we are doing currently. So CareSource is a managed care organization. We are a nonprofit that serves 1.6 million members across 5 states, including Ohio, Indiana, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Georgia. Our members all fall within the buckets of the 3 M's of government-sponsored health care, including Medicaid, which is the largest cohort of our membership, Marketplace, and Medicare Advantage. And so as a nonprofit working in the managed care space, it is quite unique in that we really do focus on a mission-driven approach where we put the member at the center to be able to address not only health needs, but all the other needs that come to the members. Next slide, Monique. And as part of that drive through our mission, in 2015, we developed a division called Life Services. And Life Services is really focused on how we can address the needs of our members and the social determinants of health. I am going to make the assumption that everyone is familiar with the social determinants of health and the basic information and kind of justification for the work. And so as we approach it the vision is that we really are trying to focus on how to provide that holistic foundation to address the social determinants of health that impact a member's overall health and well-being. And as we do this, we take a centric focus on the social determinant of health as the core in what we do, and then add in the health and the clinical aspects to it. Somewhat different than the way of the approach that others may use, where they still remain with their main focus and main lens on the clinical and then looking for the barriers or the other factors that may be influencing the clinical outcomes. Ours is somewhat reversed, and the social determinant is at the core, and then the clinical is the secondary. So next slide, please, Monique. This slide here, this is not ours. This was actually created by the U.S. House of Representatives Ways and Means Committee about 4 years ago. And that number there, $1 trillion per year that's spent on social service programs to serve low-income individuals, that's actually outdated. That today would probably be about $1.4 trillion that we are spending as a country on programs that serve low-income individuals. And each one of these bubbles that you see across this slide, they're different programs, and each color represents a different agency or area within the federal government. So you have housing. Those are the pink buckets or the pink bubbles out there. You have health, which are kind of the peachy colored bubbles. You have food, social services, education, all of those different bubbles. And as an individual who is low income navigates these programs, that what they realize quickly is that there's different rules, different ways of becoming a part of these programs. There are different criteria, and everything kind of moves along a continuum within these programs, and each one is different from place to place. As this money flows down from the federal government, it often goes to states or directly to communities. Then usually the states may pass it down to county level administrations, and it gets dispersed. But the programs still usually function individually in silos. And so for life services, what we're really focused on is how do we help fill this white space? Knowing that most of our members participate in anywhere from 7 to 10 of these programs at any given time, how do we help reduce the noise, reduce the clutter, and help them to coordinate this? And so we want to make this system feasible for our members. We want them to be able to have access, but we also want them to have a vision of what it takes and what can happen if they move out of the system and into a life of prosperity. Next slide, please, Monique. And so as we talk about anyone involved in our programs, we know that one of the keys for them to be able to finding that path into sustainability and prosperity is to have affordable housing. So for many of you, the facts that are on this screen will not be surprising. Many of the key facts that most of us know about housing and affordable housing within our communities. Just yesterday, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, they put out their most recent report of the gap, which talks about many of these factors and just about the fact that housing is unaffordable, that most people can't afford a basic unit if they're making minimum wage and working 40 hours a week. And of all those people who do qualify for housing assistance, only 1/4 of them, 25%, are actually receiving the housing assistance, leaving over 75% of folks who are out there trying to navigate an unregulated, uncharted territory on their own. That we have this lack of affordable units. And then also really looking at the fact that we see an increase in the number of young children, especially that 0 to 3 age group, increasing into homelessness, and the fact that you are most likely to experience homelessness in those first 5 years of life. So many groups out there, many health systems, plans, whatever group it is working within the social determinants of health, they know these facts. They see this. They've read the GAP report. They've read a lot of the information that comes out of great researchers and great think tanks across the country, and they might be able to speak to these facts. But what we really wanted to focus on is, what do we do with this information, and how do we really integrate this into our work and also into what we do and what we deliver to communities. So next slide, please, Monique. So as we looked at this, we really didn't want to just have a philosophy around how we address affordable housing. We didn't want to just have very member-focused goals. We wanted to make sure that every goal that we created around affordable housing, every objective that we created, did benefit our members, and it did benefit us as a plan. But just as important is that it helps to achieve the overall goals of creating and sustaining affordable housing within communities, and that it really looks at how we can address some of the systemic roots of what causes the barriers to exist within affordable housing. And so in our work, we are currently working in the 4 buckets that you see here. And just to highlight a few of these, so we have created formal partnerships to address housing stability. And so we are a workforce development provider in a Jobs Plus demonstration grant that is currently ongoing in Dayton, Ohio. And that is where our headquarters are. We partnered with the Metropolitan Public Housing Authority here in Dayton, and they received the Jobs Plus, but they needed someone to actually implement it on the ground. And they really needed a group that could see the membership as very holistic and very low barrier entry into the program. And so they came to us, a managed care organization. They said, would you be able to do this? We had our Job Connect program already set up, and we did agree that we would work within the facility doing the Jobs Plus program, helping connect individuals to work and training, and that it would not matter if the person had a felony background. It would not matter if they were non-compliant on a drug treatment program. It would not matter if they were currently impacted by mental or behavioral health issues, that we would work with them as kind of a employment first kind of approach, and that we wouldn't hold any barriers to them pursuing these interests. And that has yielded great results within that grant. Another one is that we are working on financing affordable housing. We are a nonprofit, so we don't participate in the low-income housing tax credit as a purchaser of tax credits. So we have to be more creative in the way that we look at developers and development. So we have been a partner in many different development projects where we have brought different elements to the project, whether it be health consulting or helping to coordinate our members and targeted populations into the housing. But we also have become an investor in a housing action fund in Ohio, where we invested a amount of money into a $100 million housing action fund in Columbus, Ohio, to be able to help advance the needs of affordable housing. When we did that, it was not just to invest in Ohio and in Columbus specifically. It was really to build a model of how we could create this type of investment across all the markets that we enter and that we are currently in. So we are currently seeking to replicate and scale that investment model across our current footprint and also as we enter other new states. So if you're out there in Indiana or Georgia, Kentucky, or West Virginia, and you are aware of a housing investment, you can reach out to me and we'd be happy to discuss the opportunity. We do work with national partners, so great groups like advocacy groups like the Root Cause Coalition or Opportunity Starts at Home. Those are great groups that we work with to help promote especially policy agendas. We also work with other groups that are community development focused or national developers to help build out different options and different innovations within affordable housing. And lastly, we'll talk a little bit more about some of these efforts after Adrian presents, but we also focus on how we can help to improve housing affordability. And so we are looking at programs that link health outcomes and rental assistance to measure and track the improvements in both health and housing stability for those who receive these combined programs. And with that, we're going to transition over to Adrian. She's going to talk to you a little bit about their work, and then we'll come back together again and talk to you a little bit about a case study we have of Columbus, Ohio, and the work that we're each doing there. So, Monique, I will turn it over to you and to Adrian.
Yes, so thank you, Amy. I will jump right in, Monique. I am an advisor with the Center for Community Investment. The center is an initiative of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, and our whole goal is to ensure that people of color and people with low incomes have a fair chance to lead healthy lives. We do that through 3 programs. One is through a fellowship in which individual leaders across the country are hoping to solve complex challenges within their communities. We work with anchor institutions, primarily health systems, with our Accelerating Investments for Healthy Communities program, in which we're working directly with 6 health systems across the country to really deepen and accelerate affordable housing within their communities. And then the Connect Capital program is focused on cross-sector collaboration within particular areas, ranging from affordable housing to green infrastructure to climate resiliency. Overall, our hope is really to influence the community investment field by participating in networks like this, but providing a framework in which community investment folks have some way of moving the agenda towards community investment. Next slide, please, Monique. And so this is just where we're currently working. We are based in DC, in Cambridge, but most of our work is nationally, as you can see, working with Common Spirit Health in San Bernardino to, as I mentioned, climate resiliency and affordable housing in Miami, Florida. Next slide, Monique. So why are we doing this? As we all know, communities need access to good jobs, affordable homes, safe places to gather and play, just like you see here with the playground depiction here. And really, we know that the well-being of our communities is tied to how we invest in them. And so for decades, there hasn't been great investment in communities that have suffered from structural racism and just simply disinvestment. And this has resulted in places of concentrated poverty and significant health inequity. So investments in the conventional financing system, have been to some degree great, but they typically take the path of least resistance and seek to maximize return. Our overall goal is to make sure that community investment specializes in improving the social, economic, and environmental conditions in these communities, while also producing some economic return for investors. Next slide, please. And so we like to distinguish between the terms spending and investment when we talk about community investment. The scale of transformation needed can't be done by grants alone. So I don't think we can, talking about all of the things related to housing that Amy kind of outlined for us as a problem, grants won't solve. But we know for sure that if there are different variations of capital within a system, then it can go a long way. Our executive director often makes the distinction of poetic versus financial use of the word investment. So we may be spending dollars for housing vouchers, but are we truly addressing the overall affordable housing system and making sure that we are sustaining the amount of units for a robust housing system? And so by tapping into additional capital and investment, we now can have more dollars that can flow to making the changes we want to see. We can use those precious grant dollars for things that otherwise couldn't be funded. And then we have more strategies that can be used to address the problems we all care about. Next slide, please. And we do this using our capital absorption framework, which is a part of how we focus on the community investment system. By defining shared priorities within a community, by building and executing an investable pipeline, and improving the enabling environment, which would be the policies and practices within a community, we feel like that is how you end up increasing the scale and impact of investment overall. And I'll go into each one of these briefly. Next slide, please. So with shared priorities, the goal here is that we want to position stakeholders to make appropriate decisions among competing needs. We want to align and maximize scarce resources and bridge the gap between planning and implementation so they can move more quickly to action. For example, if we want shared priorities, we need to be sure that they're legitimate, that they're straightforward, they're focused on the system, and that they're timely. So an example of this would be creating 100 rental housing units for persons with incomes of 60 to 80% AMI over the next 2 years in XYZ neighborhood. In that way, everybody in that community knows exactly what you're working on, and they know how they can pipe into that priority. Next slide, please. So the next piece is the pipeline piece, and this is where you look at a set of deals and projects that can advance and impact a community at scale to achieve those shared priorities that you just identified. The focus here is moving from a transaction to transaction approach to more of a system-wide approach where you're looking at all the opportunities within the system. You're identifying where the system is stuck. So for example, if there were 3 LIHTC deals within a particular community, and one of the 3 were awarded the credit, then there is a choke point within that system. And so identifying what the choke points are then leads us to the next conversation of enabling environment. Next slide, please. And here the enabling environment is really what are the policies, the resource flows, the relationships, the skills, and behaviors that's needed to accelerate or impede a deal. So using that LIHTC example, what would it take to expand the funding sources within that community to not just rely on those awards every year? How can you make sure you expand the base of relationships so that you are involving not just public sector, but you're thinking about private sector and philanthropic dollars that might accelerate those particular needs within the community. Next slide, please. So just to share, and you can go to the next one, just to share an approach in practice, we are working in Coachella Valley in California through our Connect Capital program. And they are really working to expand investors and capital to finance a pipeline of affordable housing efforts on a regional level. They know for sure that the housing that's needed needs to address migrant workers all the way to folks that are working in some of the tech companies across that region. And so their overall approach is really trying to figure out what does that capital stack look like. We often describe the capital stack as it's not a sheet cake, it's more of a layered cake. And so we use this example a lot of times with our teams to talk about what's the different levels of investment that could go into a system. And so the Coachella Valley team actually went to talk to a state commissioner, and they presented her with a layered cake, which is the picture you see to the right, and said to her, we want you to be a part of this layer, a part of this cake. And so which layer would you like to take on to help us address our affordable housing needs? Now, while that is an example that is both literal and also, exciting for them to have cake, it did really help her think through, okay, what level of investment do we want to provide, and how can our investment accelerate leverage within the region? And so she actually, the state commissioner actually posted this on Twitter and was really excited about what that cake could look like for the region. Next slide, please. So as you're thinking from moving from theory to action, there's some internal assessment that can happen as well as external assessment. What we've seen across our teams is that it's really important to address the roles, the assets that the particular organization may carry, as well as what are some of the disciplines that might need to be at the table. So how can you have some cross-sector dynamics play a part of it? Or cross-department maybe even within your organization to bring different skill sets to the table, as well as how can you leverage the different resources within your own organization to allow for you to be a part of the overall community table. And then lastly, what partners can each department bring as you're thinking about your own internal assessment, from how do we make sure we are being the organization that we want others to play. On the external assessment side, this is where the capital absorption framework really takes hold, because as you're thinking about your shared priorities, you're thinking about what are the community's priorities, who are the stakeholders that are currently doing the work, and what has already been done and what remains to be done. So really asking these questions both internally and externally helps the organization think through how they want to fit into the puzzle. On the pipeline side, thinking about, okay, what are the deals that are currently in the system or within a particular community, and are they truly advancing the shared priorities of the community? If the mayor has said that they want to invest, he or she wants to invest in homelessness as a first priority, then are the shared priorities addressing that effort as well, so that there's some alignment? And then what are the gaps in the system? Are there actually providers within the system that can handle the priority that's been envisioned by an elected official? And then lastly, the enabling environment. Again, what are the policies that are working? What are the policies that are not working? For example, here in Baltimore, and I think across the country, a lot of these low-income housing tax credit applications usually have a preference for communities of opportunity. And what that means is these communities that have been disinvested in for so long are no longer communities of opportunity and can't access those credits and have those additional affordable housing units within those communities. And so what's the trade-off for both the state to invest within those communities, while also what are some of the affordable housing developers doing to say, raising a flag to say there may be some additional programming that needs to happen so that there can be additional units within that community. Next slide, please. So as Amy mentioned, she and our organizations have been working in Columbus, Ohio. We have been working primarily with Nationwide Children's Hospital as a part of our Accelerating Investments for Healthy Communities program. These are the 6 hospitals and health systems that we've been working with. And the one, like I said, today we're going to focus on is Nationwide Children's, where we've really been working with them to deepen their affordable housing efforts. They've been doing this for many years, so this is not new to them, but we definitely wanted to help them think about how they can accelerate it and how they might think about doing it in another community. Next slide, please. So one difference with the Nationwide Children's is that they do have a whole separate arm called the Healthy Neighborhoods, Healthy Families program, in which they are working on all of these things comprehensively, similar to what Amy was mentioning earlier, from affordable housing to education to health and wellness and workforce development. And this organization, we've worked with them primarily on the red circle, the affordable housing piece, but they are working on a comprehensive approach. Next slide, please. So their overall goal was really to preserve affordable housing through acquisition, rehab, and operation for 10 years. They, taken that capital stack example that I mentioned from Coachella Valley, they also did this approach, and they did it by creating a capital stack with guarantees that would attract additional investment. So the deep blue on the left side is the investment that the health system made as a guarantee for a loan loss reserve for the Southside Renaissance Fund. What that did was it attracted other players like the Ohio Capital Finance Corporation, which is a CDFI, to come in with additional leverage, as well as the Affordable Housing Trust of Columbus and Franklin County. And then you see senior debt that came in from other local financial institutions. So the whole idea here was, instead of us, doing the development directly, it could also be beneficial to have a fund that could also leverage additional dollars within that community. Their next approach is to look outside of the South Side community where their headquarters are located to another community near the Ohio State University in London. And so they're planning to take some of these same elements, of course, thinking about who the right partners are at the table, but they're planning to really dig deep in London and do some of the same activities and same leverage activities there as well. So with that, I'll turn it over and let Amy talk about the work that they've done as well with Nationwide. I think you'll see how our approach was more on a macro level, and then you'll see how the other pieces of this really work to make sure it's addressing all the different pieces of social determinants of health. So Amy, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you. So in our work in Columbus, Ohio, we actually started in 2016 with one of the partners in the Southside Renaissance area, which is Community Development for All People, on a micro pilot, looking at the relationship between housing stability and healthy birth outcomes. In this micro pilot, 10 pregnant women were offered rental assistance. They all found housing within units that were owned by Community Development for All People, which is a nonprofit community development organization within the area. And they received the rental assistance for the duration of their pregnancy, and then for up to 1 year after the baby was born, and then for a step down period of about 3 months. And so during that time, we measured the health of the baby at birth, and then just what the status of the baby's health was at their first birthday. And so for those 10 women, all of the women gave birth, and there was one baby who was slightly low birth weight, but all of the others were full term and healthy birth weight, as defined as 37 weeks for full term and healthy birth weight at 2,599 grams. And so at their first birthdays, all the babies were still healthy and thriving. And so from that, we kind of took an indication that maybe housing had some kind of impact on the ability for women to have healthy birth outcomes. And so through some legislative priorities in the state of Ohio, some funding was set aside at the state level through the Ohio Housing Finance Agency to be able to have a research study that would look at the relationship between rental assistance and birth outcomes. Columbus applied for that funding, and they were granted, and so we then expanded it to a 100-person study, and 50 of the women were in a control group, and 50 of the women were in an intervention group that received rental assistance for the duration of the pregnancy for up to 1 year after the baby was born, and then a step-down period. That research study started in 2018. All of the women were CareSource members at the time that they signed up so that we could have some continuity in data tracking, especially the health data, outcomes, and all the different health information that we wanted to collect in this. Nationwide Children's Hospital is the primary researcher on this study. Celebrate One, which is the infant mortality task force in Columbus, Ohio, is one of the partners. Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority, Homeless Families Foundation, which is a nonprofit case management and social service provider to homeless families in Columbus, Ohio, is a major partner. And then many others, including other funding agencies such as KeyBank, NiSource, which is an energy company, things like that, in Columbus. So since we started the program, all of the pregnancies have concluded. The first set of babies are currently celebrating their first birthday. We have about 15 of the babies who've celebrated their first birthday to date. And we really now are starting to be able to gain a lot of information about the women. And everybody has been very eager to learn about the long-term health outcome, but I think there's also a lot of very important information that we learned early on in this study. And so we learned about the women who didn't get into the program. We felt we had been very liberal in the requirements to enter into the program. We set the caps at a woman couldn't have more than 6 evictions. She couldn't have more than $1,800 in utility debt. She had to be in the first or second trimester of her pregnancy. She had to be, I believe our cap was 50% AMI or below. And also for criminal record, the only thing that really eliminated a person was arson or the manufacturing of drugs within a home, because those were pretty standard requirements because the women were going through the Metropolitan Housing Authority to receive the rental assistance. All the other requirements were mainly because we knew that they would have to be accepted into a unit on the open private market. And so we wanted to make sure that we were taking women who would be able to deploy the vouchers. In some cases, we knew that these would still be hard to house women, but we had some incentives for landlords in place that would make it more appealing to be able to rent to the women who might be higher risk. And so in some cases, we were paying security deposit. In some cases, we were paying months of rent up front. There are many different support mechanisms there, including Homeless Families Foundation and kind of a constant communication line for the landlords that were participating. But what we found is a lot of women were turned away from the program because even though the average age was 24 of the women who entered the program, many of them already had more than 6 evictions. And there was a large number of women who exceeded the utility debt amount. The utility company was willing to forgive up to a certain point of utility debt. We were able to pay up to a certain point of utility debt, but it was really about $1,500 to $1,800 where we kind of had to draw a line. And there were many women who exceeded that. Many of those women who exceeded the utility debt had not been collected or accrued in their name. It was not because of their rental history, but because the utilities had been set up in their name when they were a child, and the non-payment followed them into adulthood, even though the the debt was really not theirs per se. So those were some of those root cause items that we've learned about. Now as we look at replication in the future and future outreach to women and to those who are low income, we know that focusing on eviction prevention and also on managing debt around utilities and other items like that are essential into helping women and others maintain housing stability. The early numbers out of the health outcomes, we do know that there are some elements of this that are kind of the best case scenario. The women who entered the program, it was 100 women who are agreeing to be in a research study. This is an IRB research study where there's a lot of things that the women had to agree to, and they had to sign, and they had to be very understanding of what they were entering into. And there were different kind of places where we made sure that the women understood what they were signing up for. And because of that, most of the women are fairly compliant women. These are women who were going to the prenatal appointments. They were not very high-risk behavior, engaging in high-risk behavior or drug activity for the most part. Mainly these were women who were entering into a program knowing that kind of every move that they made was being watched and monitored along the way. And so even in that, we do see distinctions between the birth outcomes of the intervention group to the control group. We see that the intervention group did show more positive trends towards healthy birth outcomes, a higher rate of babies born full term, higher rate of babies that were a healthy birth weight, and that in the control group, in the intervention group, there were no fetal losses or pregnancy losses in that group. So we are now looking and hoping to expand this. It was really a feasibility study to understand what a larger research study would look like. We're hoping to move into that next phase and to get support from either state or federal officials and funding sources to be able to do that. But we're also looking for other types of replication in communities that are interested in improving birth outcomes, but also maternal outcomes, and how we can use rental assistance as a part of that. And if you flip to the next slide, Monique, I kind of talked about a lot of this, but you'll see some of the statistics on here about the women. We did see that there was a racial disparity within those who entered the program. All of the women had either been homeless or at risk of homelessness at the time that they entered the program. And so it did follow trends that show that women of color are more likely to have a higher rate of homelessness in comparison to the general population numbers. The education attainment was a little bit lower for this group than of the general public, which also is somewhat indicative of that severe housing instability criteria. We are happy to say that of the women who did receive the vouchers, only one was unable to deploy the voucher, but that was more through a personal choice and not the fact that she wasn't able to find a unit. And so we were able to work with all the women to actually be able to deploy those vouchers into stable housing units. The average it took was 62 days. Even with women entering in their first or second trimester, this made, in many cases, us pushing up against the birth of the baby and kind of having to be very mindful of trying to place the women in housing before the baby was born. And so I will stop there. One thing I will add, sorry, as I say I will stop, I will also add that as we talk about this program, a lot of people get really excited about it. And as we show some of the early outcomes, people are like, okay, let's make this bigger. State officials, funders have said, okay, let's take this to 1,000 women. Let's take this to 10,000 women. Let's go big. Let's do this. And as we started hearing that, we were really excited and we were ready to go. But then we kind of had to pump the brakes a little bit because we realized in Columbus, which has the backbone already to take this into scale or to replicate it, we knew we struggled to find units for 50 women. It was very difficult, and we had to pull out all those incentives that I talked about to get landlords to rent to 50 women. And 28 of our women ended up going into place-based vouchers within the public housing authority. So really, we weren't even talking about the whole cohort having to be placed in private landlord units. So as we realized this, we also knew that we needed more units, we needed more affordable units, and we needed more capacity within that affordable market in Columbus, which is a market that is quickly reducing affordability. And so that was part of the reason that we became an investor in the Columbus Housing Action Fund, was because we knew that anytime that we do this work, that we almost have to couple, just like Adrian was talking about, that capital absorption and what is your pipeline and what is your market and how well can your community absorb this type of work. We knew that it had to kind of have multifacets in how we looked at that absorption rate and what it really means to have a network adequacy, which is a very common term in healthcare. As we looked at network adequacy within the social determinants of health, we knew that there were spots that we kind of had to shore up. So we've become an investor in making sure that that happens. And with that, I will stop. And I don't know if, Adrian, you have any final comments, or Monique, if we want to open it up to questions.
Adrian, any final thoughts?
I'm ready for questions.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, just to remind our participants, thank you guys so much, Adrian, Amy, for that really incredible presentation. Reminder to our participants to, if you have questions, to type them into the question pane, usually located at the right side of your screen, and we can go ahead and ask our presenters. I do have a question just, that popped into my head, Amy, as you were talking about some of the barriers to, the lack of availability of affordable housing problem in Columbus. Being in DC, it's a very large problem here in DC. I can imagine it's a problem in a lot of cities across the country. Other than partnering in collaboratives and action funds like you were doing, how can organizations from across sectors work to mitigate that barrier of access and availability of affordable housing units?
Yes, yes, this is Amy, and I will say that is a great question. This is an element that we've seen in our program with Job Connect. We work with employers. And I will say we have a similar conversation with employers that we have with landlords. Oftentimes, they don't know, or they may not realize, if it's a private landlord who says they don't accept vouchers, that they may have assumptions that individuals with vouchers are different than those who they are renting to. And that there's some type of, that in order to get a voucher that you're worse off or that you have more negative factors, which isn't true. Oftentimes it is that individuals who receive vouchers have more opportunities in their favor and that they have better histories than other individuals on the free market because they have the stability of the voucher. And so helping landlords, especially small landlords, understand that, helping people to kind of dispel some of those myths and stereotypes, whether it be in employment or in housing or in food access, whichever bucket you're working in, just dispelling that and kind of using oftentimes our our platform, if you're a house provider, if you're a plan, or you're a large or small nonprofit, it doesn't matter. People are listening to your voice, and being able to share that message is always important.
Yeah, and I would add that a lot of times it requires some landscaping of who exactly are the actors within the system overall, and understanding what their motivations are for doing the work, but also thinking about who's not at the table. So if you have a whole cast of affordable housing developers and CDCs and nonprofits, but you don't have like philanthropic partners or any private sector actors at the table, then think about what their motivations would be for investing in this. Large employers, it's definitely affecting their bottom line if they can't find the employees to actually work within their industries. And so if that's the motivation for them, then, that's a way to get them at the table to talk about this as a larger system play. I think oftentimes too, when we are in these circles, I know as a houser, I often talk about affordable housing and AMIs and all of this terminology that means nothing for, a resident that is experiencing the gap in affordable housing. So talking about it in a softer sense, talking about the homes in which we live in, and talking about it from, the homes will vary in rents from, $300 to $600. I wish that were the case, but that saying it in a different way could actually make it a softer conversation than the traditional terminology piece that we struggle with when trying to invite different actors to the table.
Thank you guys for those thoughtful answers. A question that we got from one of the participants was, when we're thinking about implementation and turning theory into practice, getting community member buy-in is super important, and getting communities engaged in the interventions. How have you guys and how have you empowered community members or clients to be engaged in the interventions that you are doing, and to make sure that they're meeting the needs of the communities and being flexible within them?
So, Amy, I'll start. Because we're dealing with health systems in some of our programming, those are often the same institutions that the community may also have some trust issues with, right? So one of the things that we've really have been trying to work with health systems on is thinking about who the actual community is and how do you make sure you get those folks at the table. This has been a work in progress. I can't say that I, have a formula for it, but I think that is certainly something that we're focusing a lot of attention to, on making sure that there's community voice, and that the community also feels like there's some power play in whatever their priorities are. And so that's when we talk about shared priorities. Before the institution is even thinking about what investment they are planning to do, we really want to make sure that they've engaged the community to understand what those priorities are. So, for an example, we're working with Bon Secours Mercy in Cincinnati. And their headquarters are within a historically Black neighborhood in Cincinnati called Bond Hill Roselawn. And this community is trying to stand up a CDC so that they can be at the table, so that they can make decisions about what happens within their community. And so Bon Secours Mercy has really been working with them on some capacity building and making sure that they have the tools on the ground to be the organization that carries out activities in the future.
This is Amy. I'll add, so we work very closely with community-based organizations that are on the ground, and really look for organizations that have a good sense of the community and who have gained trust. And so in our project in Columbus, I spoke of Homeless Families Foundation. They were really the organization that had that very base level face-to-face, on-the-ground, grassroots relationship with the members, and they were able to help build the program with a great perspective for the individuals. And but one of the things that I will mention is that within the Infant Mortality Task Force Celebrate One, they hired some community health workers through the managed care organization. CareSource has also community health workers, care managers, life coaches. All different groups have different people who do work face-to-face. And so in some cases, people will gain relationships with different individuals. And so a lot of it is about helping the face-to-face grassroots organizations build trust within the other organizations that are part of the project, so that they feel comfortable bringing those individuals in with the members, that they encourage the members to create relationships, and that they promote the safe space that everyone is trying to create for them, because it is important that we help individuals be able to have the safety to be able to create those relationships across the different silos, across the different organizations, and really be able to have that seamless feeling within the programming, and that it's very inclusive. That is not easy to do. That oftentimes takes a lot of training on the staff side, on the member-facing staff teams, and different types of products that go out to be member-facing, or anything that's seen by the individual, making sure that it is right and having that view, but making sure that it is inclusive, and that you're, instead of sitting there and saying, no, we're not going to let you in, do kind of that capacity building on both sides. For the nonprofit, say, hey, big organization who's kind of unnimble and maybe kind of doesn't have a good flavor of the community, let us help you to improve your capacity and improve your outreach so that you can do it better. And then oftentimes the larger organization may have data, or it may have larger insights or things like that they can help provide to the nonprofit, so the nonprofit builds their capacity. So making it a two-way street and really doing that true integration, I think, is really important.
Thank you so much. And I think we just have time for one more question. Both of you, when you were talking about your organizations, and it's really inspiring how much social determinants of health and health equity is so ingrained in the mission of your organizations. And one of our participants asked, how did you get there? You know, was it a board that really wanted to ingrain this? Was it a couple champions in specific departments? And I guess one, in 30 seconds or less, what's a piece of advice that you have for someone that really wants to be a champion in their organization for this work?
So this is Amy. I will say we were very lucky at CareSource that our founder and at the time CEO in 2015, she believed strongly in this work and really adopted it when many other health plans weren't jumping feet first. She took it on, and that was a big part of it that got us started. Housing, though, we didn't have that same momentum when we first got started. And so it really was helping people take small bites and really take little steps and small wins over and over. And now because we started with small wins, small steps, it has taken us kind of to the big leagues and kind of the big work that we were really hoping for. It took a little time, but it was well worth it.
Yeah, and I would say the same. The co-founders for the center had this vision of a framework that could help communities. So they were working for funders that were looking for communities that were ready to absorb capital. And what they were finding was that there weren't a lot of communities that could absorb it. And so they came up with this framework. So the great thing about that is we have a framework and we've been able to use that in our programming, and it's been fantastic. What I will say is some of those questions that was in the slide related to the internal assessment and the external assessment, I think can be some great questions to use as you're thinking about how you can broaden your scope or accelerate whatever programming around social determinants of health, as well as any community development and affordable housing initiatives.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Just a reminder for all of our participants that a recording of this webinar and the slide deck will be available on our Forum B website. If you have any issues logging onto Forum B, please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out at mvanvalericum@rootcausecoalition.org, or an easier one is contact@rootcausecoalition.org, and we'll be able to get you up on the Forum B website right away. Thank you so much, Adrian and Amy. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to share your expertise. And we hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Thank you guys so much.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.